Hello, and welcome to the South Coast Artists Index, where artists, performers, and writers, as well as curators, directors, and supporters, anyone with ties to the creative community, drops by to introduce themselves to you. We'll talk about their beginnings, their vision, their passion, and so much more. The South Coast Artists Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere.
Hi, this is Ron Fortier with another episode of the In Focus podcast brought to you by the Artist Index. And today we have a returning guest, and I'm going to skip the whole thing about having them introduce themselves and spell their names and such, because this is not your average podcast that we're doing today. This is something really fantastic. This is going to be the very first time that we're going to announce we're doing a series of podcasts. And that series of podcasts is going to be focused on jazz. And the gentleman who's going to speak with you in a few minutes knows jazz upside down, backwards, inside and out. And this podcast series is going to be brought to you by Fiber Optic Center, the same folks that helped get that beautiful jazz mural up in the historic district, the National Park. And I'm just going to have Dave introduce himself.
Yes, I'm Dave Reis, and I've done radio jazz at UMass Dartmouth. I did it for 26 years until they sold the station. And it's my passion to promote jazz, jazz musicians, history of jazz, and that's some of the things I plan on doing, the history of jazz. History of jazz here in New Bedford. We've already done a podcast on that, but there's more that I want to talk about. Some of the musicians from New Bedford who went on to play, like with Duke Ellington, Sarah Vaughan, Machito, and I just want to let it be known out there what these guys did and how they started here. And I might do a little crossover because a lot of the jazz musicians that originated were Cape Verdians, and they started playing Cape Verdian music because that was music. And as they got older, they learned about jazz. So I might do a little bit about their Cape Verdian start before some of the fellows that played, like Jimmy Lomba, who went on to be with Dinah Washington and Earl Father Hines out on the West Coast. And I just want to let the information about them, the music, of course, but more about the background and what these fellows and these people went through in the music. And then we also had a lot of rhythm and blues come through here because in those days, they only played in one-nighters. They didn't play in coliseums and anything. So I'd like to talk about that in one of those. And I'd like to get guests, of course, to some of the musicians who were around from that time. There's very few left at that time. From that time, but that's what I would like to do. I just want to promote it.
Yeah, exactly.
How it started. Like I say, this is the whaling city, but it also was the whaling city. So
yeah,
that's what I want to get out there.
Yeah. Now, you when we spoke about this, you had two interlocking concepts, which was, and you kind of like tiptoed across it just now. You're going to talk about the jazz artists that came to New Bedford, like into New Bedford. I think that was the segment you called.
Yes.
And then the other concept was just the opposite, out of New Bedford. So we had
Right.
artists, jazz artists, nationally known jazz artists, or soon to be at that period in time, soon to be known, climbing, emerging jazz artists coming into the city and staying here. And then we had homegrown jazz artists going out into the world and bringing. I've heard, I think we talked about this the last time. I've heard from people who know a lot about jazz that New Bedford is responsible, or the musicians from New Bedford are responsible for the jazz that we know of today. When people think of jazz, it was born here.
It's true. And that was too what helped. We were so close to Boston. You had musicians from Boston come into New Bedford and play, and a lot of musicians played in New Bedford before they were famous with different, like say Jimmy Smith, the organist. He used to come here with the Don Gardner Trio before he made it. There's quite Richard Groove Holmes, and there was a lot of jazz here. Like the Piccadilly had 7 nights a week, and then there were a lot of clubs that had jam sessions on Sundays and weekend jazz, So a lot of musicians would come in from Boston. They were at Berkeley, or they were from Boston, because a lot of musicians that made famous were in Boston. In fact, a lot of New York musicians used to love to come to Boston because Mass Ave was a big jazz thing. So they would all come to New Bedford for jam sessions, So I always say I talk about the musicians that come from New Bedford and the musicians that came to New Bedford.
Yeah, and Berkeley, another thing I've heard of, I pick up stuff and I remember it.
Yes.
It's like that dumb commercial they had a few years back. I pick things up, I put things down.
Yeah.
But I had heard that New Bedford and Berkeley School of Music, my goodness, I mean, the amount of students from New Bedford that went to Berkeley, and then those students became faculty. So it's like a washing machine. It goes is going through the cycles.
Yes, Jackie Santos, the drummer, he became a teacher there at Berkeley. He went to Berkeley. Then I don't know if he's retired yet, but he was there for many years. Jackie Santos, the drummer.
And his son now goes by Joaquin, which is funny because Jackie couldn't use Joaquin. Like the times of flip-flop.
That's right, because Joaquin is the Cape Verdian name for Jackie, for Joaquin, yeah. So, and the guys came through, and there were a lot of guys at Berkeley, like this Bill Keelson, great drummer, played with Chris Bodie now. When he was a student in high school, he played at the main event over here every weekend. They'd bring bands from Boston.
Right.
Or even if bands from New Bedford were playing, they'd have guys from Boston come in and play.
Now, a father and son, both drummers.
Mm-hmm.
But for some reason, Zildjian, when I think of them, I think of Zildjian. Was there some sort of an association between Jackie, the father, with Zildjian as far as development or anything of the symbols? Or there's a whole story about Zildjian, how that came about. Yeah,
it's possible because in fact, he before he went to Berkeley, he was the drummer for Tavares. He started with Tavares, and it's possible being on staff at Berkeley, but I don't know for sure. But that's possible.
Yeah. Now, we always think of the brass section. Rarely do we hear about, that I'm aware of, and it doesn't mean anything, pianists or guitarists, but even more so, vocalists, male or female. Any vocalists that you can think of that come to mind?
Well, years back when the original jazz band from New Bedford, Duke Oliver Band, and it became the Skyliners when Duke did, I think it was Charlie Gonsalves that was a male singer. And then we have Sean Montero, but she's not originally from New Bedford. I believe her family was from Marion, and she sings in Italy. She sings everywhere. She does real well. Sean Montero. She's got some recording. In fact, you mentioned Neal Weiss. He also owns a record company, Whalen City Sound, and she's one of the artists on his label. She's got a couple of recent CDs on his label.
So Neal, which I'm trying to get on the show because he's Fiber Optic Center, and Neal is the founder and ex-president, because now I believe he's passed the baton on to his son and perhaps other family members. A non-musician. I only really thought of him as the Whaling City Sound / jazz festival guy, and really didn't understand that he was pressing CD. Well, they don't press CDs, I guess. They press records. Was he ever in the LPs, the vinyl?
No. That I've known him. In fact, I was with Neil Tuesday. He's in California because he was supposed to come with me, try to come with me, but he supposedly turned it over to his sons, but he still has a contact, so he had to fly out for business for them. So he's semi-retired. No, that was his dream. I remember when we first started Fiber Optics. I've known him for quite a few years, and he said, "If I make it famous, David, I'm gonna have a record company." So that's a hobby. That's his hobby.
That's his hobby. Yeah.
But he's got some fine artists on this label.
Yeah, I've seen some of the names, And again, it's like with classical music. I enjoy classical music and jazz, but I'll be honest with you, I couldn't tell you one tune from another, or even though I was a set designer for opera, I just enjoy the music. And sometimes I feel like it's like people who, and I'm not a sports guy at all, but these guys who do baseball and they're like, their heads are full of statistics, and it's like, I don't know, just watch the game and enjoy it, have a hot dog.
Yeah. It's well, funny you say that, because that's one of my passions about jazz, because the word jazz covers too much, so I try to, because say someone that doesn't know anything about jazz and they wanted me to take them in the clubs, I'd be careful who I took, because you can take them to hear somebody like Errol Garner, who played My Funny Valentine, like that. So for the first time, I make sure put them in to bring something like that, opposed to somebody never heard jazz. If I brought them in to see Coltrane, who I loved, but played way out there, to them that's jazz. So the word jazz just covers too much. Just like saying food, steak is food.
Yeah.
But fish is food. So I'm very. That's what I try to. I did a course with South Coast Learning Network about Let's Talk Jazz, and I try to explain to people, if you just heard this one artist, that's not all of jazz. You get another guy that plays a different type, but it's all considered jazz, So a lot of people get turned away the first time if they went and they saw somebody that was way out there, and they say, "Oh, that's jazz," So
yeah,
that's what I try to get across.
It is a spectrum, a huge spectrum.
Yeah,
that's for sure. And it seems to be this two stations, I guess you want to call, on Amazon Music, and it's on some of those other music apps. The younger generation has seemed to rediscovered that music from way back when. There's Pink Martini, and there's the Postmodern Jukebox, and they'll take songs from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, and they'll completely turn them into some 40s, early 50s big band sort of stuff. And it's absolutely amazing that you're listening to something that was written by Nine Inch Nails, which was total rock, and they represented it.
Yeah.
But that's something that is almost a tradition in jazz, because not even some of the jazz standards didn't begin as a jazz standard, right? It was from the Great American Songbook, or whatever you want to call it.
Originally, they were playing classics, and then they would put the changes from a classic tune and improvise around it. And but it's what it was. They started off with Irving Berlin and people like that.
Yeah. Now the line between the big bands and jazz, there was Tommy Dorsey, there was Glenn Miller, Artie Shaw. People are like, oh, that's not jazz, it's a big band. Could you explain that?
Well, that's where jazz came from. It started out with big bands, and they played jazz, again, called jazz. It was danceable music. So then in the time, that's where everybody played. Skyliners, Duke Oliver, out of New Bedford, the original bands. They even had Cornell Dubilier. They used to have jazz orchestra play for lunch.
Really?
This friend of mine, Jimmy Lomba, who was one of the musicians went out, did real well. When he came back, he was old. I used to take him around. And one day a lady came up to him and said, "I remember you. You played at Cornell Dubilier for our lunch." That's how I found out about that. So that was the music. That was jazz. But what happened when the economy came where they couldn't afford to pay the big bands anymore.
Oh, yeah.
They weren't working anymore. In fact, for a while, Count Basie broke up his band, and Duke continued on, and he hung in there. But so when that fell out, the guys would stop playing. They'd want to give a plan. So now they came up with 4 quintets and quartets. And then they had to improvise, because the big band, you had the sheets of music. They were reading sheets of music. We were 4 or 5 guys. You couldn't do that. So they took the same tunes and they improvised on it. And that's when you became the long solos and more soloing. And because the big band was that. But the jazz came from big band. That was jazz. That's why I say the word jazz covers so much.
Yeah, it does. And in
And
fact, there's I think it might be. I'm trying to look it up now from a friend of mine from Chicago. He likes to he likes to refer to himself as the first the first black ad man in Chicago.
Yeah.
And his knowledge ranges all over the place. Mm-hmm. And he posted something the other day about this all black, all female band. And it was like, wow. Mm-hmm. It was absolutely unbelievable.
Is it a recent band?
No, they look like they were around from the 40s because the hairstyles were very 40-ish looking.
Yeah.
Let's see if I can find it. You can never find something when you're looking for it, but it was absolutely phenomenal. And unfortunately, it just seems like they've got one film recording of it. It's got the audio to it, but we're talking. There had to be 30 pieces, and again, I'm not a jazz aficionado. I just appreciate it, but I can't say. Well, I could, but there were certain terms that the jazz musicians would have about that guy can blow. Yeah. Right. Well, say that. It taken out of context, people will get like, what is it? But let me tell you, it was unbelievable. You see this when they got up for the solos, for the sax and solos and stuff like that. And just bouncing around in my head has nothing to do with what we were just talking about. Was it, I think, Audie Shaw, Swing, Swing, Swing. Yeah. That the drums on that were just phenomenal. Let's talk about venues, because I don't know, you've got, this first series is going to be 10 podcasts. I just hope they just keep on going until you get sick and tired of it. Neal runs out of money. But the venues, you spoke about the Piccadilly. Right. Where was that?
Piccadilly, actually, Dunkin' Donuts, the parking lot Dunkin' Donuts, that was the Piccadilly. It burnt down. And I remember Jimmy Connors, the boxer. Yes. Jimmy owned that. Well, after the Piccadilly, Jimmy took it over and he called it JC's office. And, and he had piano players, and people from that. And then there was one unit from the bank to the corner. And then Piccadilly burnt down. So then they built Dunkin' Donuts on it. Jimmy still owned the property. They rented it. And that parking lot was the Piccadilly. They never put a building there.
They never put it back.
So it was a long building like that. If you see the parking lot. So when you came in, if you had to sit towards the back, you couldn't see the stage. The stage was behind the bartenders.
Really?
Yes.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So as you see, it's long like that. Yeah. That's how the building was. Yeah. So if you sit further down, you just heard the music.
So there was a Piccadilly, and then there was Bert's. It was there.
Bert's was right on the corner, across.
Was it always Bert's Uptown, or did it start off as something else?
It was, as long as I know, it was Bert's Grill.
Bert's Grill.
Right. Okay. And they would have jazz, not constant, but they were, in fact, my uncle Joe Livamento, he played there with his quartet.
Okay.
But it was, I don't want to get into this, but Bert's, it was at the time, there were certain places.
Well, we might as well bring it out because that's part of the
There
history.
were certain places you couldn't go in. So the bands would play, but the people of color
were allowed. They were allowed to entertain, but they weren't allowed to be entertained.
Right. So Piccadilly was the first where we were integrated, because mostly all the jazz were in the Cape Verdian clubs of the West End Social, all the clubs of color, And then when the Piccadilly was already open, they didn't open for jazz; they had music there. So Sam Moxie also owned the Highway Casino. It was a big place up in the highway. It was like vaudeville.
It was on Route 6 in Westport?
Route 6, yes.
Okay.
It was the same owner. So then he decided to bring jazz in there. And when he brought the jazz in there, the people from the other jazz clubs started coming. So that's where we got integrated audience, because Piccadilly already had a white audience. Right. So now when they brought the jazz in, and it was right downtown, like on Thursday night, downtown was open at 9 till stores were open till 9. After 9, that place was mobbed because everybody's downtown. They went in. So that was the first really integrated audience.
Right.
I remember when I was young, and I played a lot of sports, and a lot of ball players, white players would ask me, Dave, can I go with you, go hear some jazz? Because they were afraid to come down. We were separate. It wasn't not good in those days here.
No, it wasn't. And, and we have this weird thing of like, this is New England. This is the North. There wasn't any of that going on. That's.
In my opinion, it was worse because down south they had signs. We couldn't go in. You don't know how many times we'd be in basketball, you walk in the place and they tell you get out of here.
Yeah.
That wouldn't have happened because down south, because you had signs, you knew you couldn't get in there.
Yeah. There was a warning.
Yeah.
Where here, you really took your chances.
Yeah. Well, there were two. I don't really dwell on this forever, but there were two famous clubs in Boston, Mass. Wally's, which now they still have a place. Wally's, the kids that run it, but he had a big place, and then there was another one, the Hi-Hat, and they had all the jazz artists who played, but only a white audience. But they were right next to each other. And when the Hi-Hat saw that Wally's, it was letting black audience come, was always packed, then they let black people come in. Money. Yeah,
money's money, right? Yeah. It's color green. It's not black or white.
So anyway, that's the way it was in those days, Well,
I've heard people who went to Paris. It was either during the war or whatever, and Paris was a big jazz town because there was a lot of expatriated blacks.
Some of our best players. And originators.
I heard stories of them saying that the jazz scene in Paris was the jazz scene in Paris because it was all inclusive.
Wow.
It was totally inclusive. Wow. And it was, and look, the French and the Parisians aren't, without their sins. But wow, it was a totally different, James Baldwin said, he felt comfortable in his own skin there.
Well, that's what happened in the 40s. Coleman Hawkins, Don Byers, these great players, and a lot of people didn't get to know them for that reason. They were great players, and they went to in Europe, and they saw they never came back, And Coleman Hawkins eventually came back, and because they were treated like celebrities. And over here, like one artist I know, he says. Here in some of the places I played, we had to go through the kitchen. We didn't even come in the door. He says, when we got there, they were greeting us at the airport and everything. So that's why those guys stayed there. They were treated as artists.
Yeah.
There was no racism involved. Johnny Griffin, one of my favorite tenor players, he went up there to play. He never came back. There's quite a few guys. The treatment that they had, they were celebrities there. Yeah.
Well, let's bring it down to today. Are there any jazz venues? And if not, should they be? Why aren't there?
There's just so many types of music nowadays. In the old days, you had dance music, you had jazz music, and that was it. And so young people are coming up, they're not hearing jazz because there's, like you said, there's no venues. So if you don't hear it, you don't pick it up, And this is.
We were on a family Zoom. One of our friends, Ronnie, it was his birthday, and I think it was his sister-in-law said that they had gone to a supper club, and everybody went supper club. Like, when was the last time? I chimed in. I said, I think around here, the last supper club that we had was the Harbor Beach was a they call it a dinner club. Same food, different, same time, same food, just different way, right? And there may have been one, maybe or two more. Was the Golden Arrow in the South End one? Or was that just a nice bar?
I don't remember.
There was so many. The Circle Champlain. There was so many places.
Oh yeah, there were places so much. See, and then again, too, like I said, in the old days, the jazz audience was basically a black audience, because couldn't go anywhere else.
Yeah.
So, civil rights came and everything, so people could do other things. They didn't have to just go to the clubs where jazz was. They can go to the other places. Like I said, but one place we couldn't get in, So, and on Mass Ave, the Hi-Hat. So, it spread, they had more choices, in a way they had to go listen to jazz.
But I mean, I think it would be, especially for a special event, because really, what special event places are there around here?
Oh.
And the special event places always used to be that place where you're going to drop a bundle.
Yeah,
But
that too. Yeah,
But it was
yeah.
a special event.
Yeah.
Well, if it's going to be a special event place, then it really ought to be special because dinner and dancing.
Yeah.
I remember back, when I came back from New York and lived with my dad. I mean, that was like a pretty normal thing.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's the economy because the cost of, back in those days, how much would a 4-piece group be getting paid if they were getting paid at all?
Actually,
it was probably $100. They all got $25 a piece, right?
If that, when I was young, even, and then a lot of the musicians were playing for free because in jazz at that time was jam sessions.
Yeah.
When the big bands broke up, so you had 3 guys, 4 guys would play, and the other guys, and then their friends would come. So what happened? Say a bar, little corner bar, sometimes would have music playing in the corner, music. So if they had 3 guys. They paid those 3 guys, but they'd get 6, 7, 8 guys play because the other musicians were coming on. Can I sit in? Yeah, come on up. And that's how jazz was in those days. There was no big venues, pay venues. So a club owner played the piano, bass, and drums, but he got all these other guys to play. And then you'd be sitting there, you didn't know who'd come in. Somebody would walk in with a horn and say, "Oh, look who's here!"
Yeah, there's this must be half a dozen of them at least now. It almost seems it's obvious it's a formula because everyone has like, oh, wait till you see what happens, or check this guy out. Yeah. And it's one of the guys, the only one I can really remember is Emilio Piano. So he'll be playing in Germany in a supermarket. How many supermarkets do you know of that have a piano in them? But anyway, he'll be playing, to entertain, or in the airport in Orly, wherever the Paris airport is. And he'll be playing, and then somebody will come up and say, "Hey, can I sing?" Or sometimes they just come out of nowhere,
right?
And that is a cool thing.
Yeah, what's funny thing about it though is you'd be sitting there and you listen there, and then you see somebody come out. Oh, look who's here! Don't play us on. Then sometimes you see somebody say, "Oh, look who's here with his horn." Yeah. But that's how it was. The jam sessions.
Yeah. Tennessee, New Orleans. I've heard. A lot of the places will have a drum set that sit on. So drums, bass, and guitar just sitting there.
Yeah.
And people will just get up.
Yeah.
Paid or not paid, they just get up and one guy will just start playing. Next thing, somebody else will join. Some people come in from the street. Yeah,
and there's one thing about New Orleans. Well, that's where it originated and everything. What's so good about New Orleans, like we're saying, I tell you that jazz. So different artists are called jazz artists. They're so extreme from one from the other, and all that. And you have some guys, or even guys that was soul music. Oh, I'm not singing with that guy. I'm not. New Orleans. Everybody plays with everybody. You could be like, play like Coltrane or not, but like you say, if there's a drum set there, piano, they start playing, everybody plays. They don't have that because even among jazz musicians, like, will frown on the way this guy plays or the style of music he plays. In New Orleans, everybody plays together. Rhythm and blues, jazz, whatever they are. They just want to make music.
What?
They don't label it as jazz, and they just want to make music.
So jazz is more than just music. It's more than just style. It's more than just sound.
Yeah.
It's community.
Yes. Yes. Right.
Wow. Yeah. And we need more of that. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah.
If you were a rich guy, and you had the opportunity to invest in and open a dinner club or something, would you do it? You think it would be successful?
I don't know. It's very hard. You don't have as many bands. Like I was just explaining how guys would be coming in with their horns, even when playing, and there's just not that many musicians anymore.
Yeah. So you probably have to do more of a less formal kind of a way where you have a stage set up, you have some instruments, house instruments up there. and just try to see if the buzz gets out into town and people just show up.
Right.
And then it's a breakout.
Yeah.
People, music just breaks out and people have fun. They're ordering and it's loud, it's noisy, it's fun.
Exactly.
Wow.
But like I say, in those days, because of the economy too, you didn't do much of anything but played ball or you played an instrument. Mm-hmm. So most everybody picked up an instrument. They had lessons downtown. So you don't have that many musicians anymore. And in a jazz event, the Musicians Union used to have a big event every Washington's birthday at the New Bedford Hotel. And they'd have a major band. It would be Duke Ellington this year, Count Basie another year, and then they'd have the whole hotel. That was on the top of the hotel.
There's a ballroom up there.
Yes, right there. You'd have Duke Ellington playing, and then throughout the building, you'd have the local musicians because it was New Bedford musicians putting on. They'd be playing in different rooms. You had music. Oh, that was a great event, But there's not that many musicians. In fact. Everybody was playing, and like I said, every bar almost has a trio or a quartet or something playing. Right. You can't find any.
Well, it would be really great to have that happen again.
Yeah, that was a wonderful event.
Yeah,
every Washington's birthday, February 27th.
Now let's talk about more of closer to our times. Jazz musicians.
I don't think it's our times. My time's a lot.
You got a few more years on me. Yeah. Which to look at you, I keep forgetting. You're at least 3-4 high school classes ahead of me.
Yeah, I'm 86.
Yeah, I'm 71. Going to be 72. So, are there still jazz musicians in town?
There's a great tenor saxophone player, Dino Gavoni. He's not originally from this area.
Yeah.
He teaches at Berkeley, but he's renting a house. He rents it from Neal here in Dartmouth. So he's a great player. In fact, he played in New York with everybody, but he's been in Berkeley. He plays quite a bit in Providence, and John Almack, a trumpet player, who used to have a big band, but now they're trying to keep it going. They play a lot in Providence. If I say a lot, maybe once a month, once or twice a month. But I could name the guys. That's how few it is. Yeah.
Now, at one time, there was a thing in high schools. Speaking of high schools, where you had the marching band, and then you had the orchestra. And then you'd have the jazz band.
Yeah, I volunteered with them for 10 years.
Are those programs still going, or do they cut back on those things too?
As I was going to say, I was going to bring that up. I volunteered with Russ I can't think of Russ's last name. Well, the band director, I'll think of it as I'm talking. I used to volunteer with him and help him in after school in the classes and stuff like that. And I announced for them when they performed different places. And towards the end, he finally retired. Towards the end, he just couldn't find kids to take it. There's so many things now for people to do too. You didn't have that much. They're having a problem. Same thing with sports because kids have so many things. They can't commit to a practice every day thing.
Well, a lot of these kids have to work.
Yeah,
because they've got a cell phone, their iPhone to pay for. Right. They've got a car and insurance that they've got to pay for, and some of them are trying to prepare themselves for college, which they're going to be paying for through the rest of their life. Right,
and towards the end, Russ was getting kids and giving them, let them use instruments, and then it just got smaller and smaller. He had a big jazz band, and then he had a quintet, and a couple of good musicians came out of there, and. Then towards the end, when he retired, he just couldn't keep it going, the jazz band going.
If I remember correctly, a couple of those, I think there were the females, a couple of the women went on to Broadway. I mean, did they go up, headliners, I don't know, but they were on Broadway. They were making a living.
Well, there's a kid, but he's not a kid, Kevin Antunes. He's Madonna's and all these stars. When they do tours, he wants he's the piano and the orchestrator. He puts Kevin Antunes. He played for out at New Bedford High School.
So. What is it with the Antunes? Tell me about that. The Antunes have to be one of the most musical families I've ever encountered in my life.
Yeah, it's funny. I know them real well. I grew up. They live in South Dartmouth.
Right.
On Milton Street, there's a big Cape Verdian population there. Right. And my step-grandparents lived there. And so I'd be, as a kid, they'd take care of me. And I'd be there. And the Antunes, and their father had them playing instruments as little kids. I don't know if you remember David Antunes.
Yes.
Well, David, I always tease him. He was named after me because I was a little kid, and I'd be there while the father was teaching them, and his mother would tell me, he was a little baby. His mother would tell me, I named him after you. And so I really believed it as a little kid.
Yeah.
So poor David passed away. But
he used to run sound. I ran into him several times.
He was a good guitar player.
Yeah.
And they all played instruments. The father played all different instruments, and he had them from a real young playing in the house.
And then some of them, or several of them, went into Tavares, correct? They were part of the Tavares?
In the band.
In the band, yeah.
And, But, they played that, and he played every instrument, the father, bass, keyboards, and everything. So they all picked up different instruments,
Wow. So now, I've brought this up a whole bunch of times on other podcasts, but it's worth bringing up again, especially since what we've just been talking about. We've got what they call the comprehensive high school, which is high school, your regular high school.
Right.
And then we have the vocational regional technical.
Yeah.
Right. Way too long.
Yeah, right.
Have a regional.
Yeah, we used to call it Voc.
Yeah, we used to call it just Voc. Yeah, exactly. And so that deals with the mechanical stuff, but it's a lot more than just that.
Right.
It's evolved. But what's missing in the middle is a visual and performing arts high school. Because there are so many kids who have talents. It's just another outlet for them to express themselves. I mean, everybody's so worried about making a living. Well, part of that worry about making a living is you've got a kid who's going to have like this, I don't even know. We have a daughter in college. I haven't even added it up yet because I don't want to know. But it's like buying a house.
Yeah, right.
And these days, let me tell you, it's way up there.
Yeah.
But making a living doesn't necessarily make you happy.
That's right. Yeah.
Because you could be making a living and just surviving.
Right.
But when you think of all these kids, and I think it's just natural, that doesn't matter what community you're in, but I know, for example, from what I've read up about Detroit, where my wife is from, there, kids, they were singing on the front steps of their houses.
Yeah.
They're just getting together for no particular reason.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nobody said you have to do this. Oh, hey, we have to, because we got to do this. No. They just started doing it.
Yeah.
Because I think we have, not only do we have all these other weird things, not weird, that's not a good word, obligations, financial obligations, because we have way too much, which we're paying way too much for and getting way too little back.
Right.
But some of these things, like the phones, these are great in so many different ways, but they suck up a heck of a lot of time too.
That's so true. I agree with you there. Yep. Yeah.
So, all right. So let's look into your show specifically. But I'm going to backtrack all the way to SMU. Now, when you were there, was it SMU or was it SMTI?
SMU.
It was SMU.
Yeah.
How did that all come about? And again, jazz, through all the years of they tried to license WSMU, but they couldn't because of Southern Methodist, I think, right? Or it was another call letter. So there was USM. Is that?
Yeah. I really don't. It was the USM when I got there. Then it ended up WUMD, the station.
Oh, that's right. That's right. That was
what happened. They sold the towers there to BU, I think it was. Mm-hmm. And they wanted to come through here, and the station was blocking them. So they bought that. So that's why we went to WUMD, another call. And then they sold that. And that's when it ended.
And I always wondered
the National Public Radio.
I always wondered why GBH's reception was really crappy over there, and I guess that explains it without me even asking. But going back to that, I mean, jazz was a mainstay for all that time. Mm-hmm. I mean, the other shows came and went. Mm-hmm. Who besides you were the DJs? The platter spinners, or whatever the terms of the day was.
Well, it started out with Bobby Green, famous alto player that came here. Right. He actually came here, and the band broke up, he had been. He was there. They were playing at the Piccadilly, whatever they were
Was
playing.
that Coleus back then?
No, he became Coleus after.
Okay.
Bobby came in. It was a blues band.
Okay.
And it was a local blues singer, and so they came off the road, and then the guy broke up here. So Bobby, and then it was this Herbie King, the drummer, and Alex Jenkins. They were stranded, so they ended up staying in New Bedford. Mm-hmm. So Bobby started his own gigs, and then he started Coleus. And his group was Coleus. That was his first group. And he, Tom Megson, Jim Oliver, they were starting the jazz radio station. And in fact, they asked Jim Oliver, yeah. Jim was for Bobby, Tom Megson, and I can't remember all the guys. And Bobby asked me when it first started, and my kids were, and it was Sunday afternoon, so it was all day Sunday from 8 until 5. Right. And my kids were young. I said, no, I can't do that on Sunday. My weekends I spend with my kids. So later on, when my kids were older, I joined. Well, actually, Bobby had passed away. Right. In fact, Gloria Clark, she was one of the people that started with him. And she called me. In fact, when Bobby passed away, she called me and she said, Bobby always wanted you to come. Now we really need you. Bobby's gone. So by then my kids were older, and then that's when I started. So I wasn't on right from the beginning. I used to help. Bobby used to borrow records from me and stuff like that. Yeah, but I didn't want to get involved in my Sundays.
Was Gloria an attorney?
No.
No, for a living? Okay.
She was a Harvard graduate, but she wasn't an attorney. She worked for the school. She worked there at UMass.
Okay. And then there was Jim Oliveira. Who was he? I mean, I knew him for a long time from the Chamber of Commerce, and he was a city councilor
for a short time.
But was he a musician or just loved jazz?
No, he wasn't a musician. Yeah.
What else do you see this podcast series giving you the opportunity to do about jazz?
Well, like you said, something on my shoulders. That's always been I just want to give the information. Mm-hmm. You know, people know this guy's a trumpet. They don't know what he went through. They don't know how good he was. Or a lot of jazz musicians played other things too, not just jazz. And I want to give information about these guys because to me, I saw what they went through, and they didn't just pick up a sax and play, you know, and that's the information I want to get out there, and I want to give information about these people. They're not just a sax player, and that's what I did on the radio. As I played an artist, I would give information about them and stuff. I want to give them the respect that they didn't get, you know. I grew up as a kid with just musicians and family all the time, and I'd be with my uncle who played. In fact, he went on to play Machito in New York in different bands. And Paul Gonsalves for Duke Ellington lived, I called him an uncle. He lived with us because he was originally from Pawtucket. And when he came to play in New Bedford area, and the Cape Verdians are like that, you live in another family. So he lived in my grandmother's house with my Uncle Joe. They went to New York together. They went and all that stuff. So I was a little kid around, and I saw them, in fact, in late years before my uncle passed away. He retired, came back, and he was living in Rhode Island. And I'd go hang out with him. And this is, like 10 years ago. And they'd have me with them and all the time. I'm just a kid sitting there. So, but I have this memory, and I'd say, Joe, what happened to so-and-so? Joe, what happened to those two ladies you and Paul went out with? He says, wow, we didn't know you were paying attention. But I have that memory. So I want to, they get out there, and I've always wanted to get out there. What I've experienced around them, they're not just sax players; they're people.
Right. They were people,
and they were artists.
Right.
They made the music. They played a lot in Boston. Then they got there's another musician, Phil Barboza, band leader, and he would run band leader, but he was a big businessman. Music was just one way of him making money. Right, he became a very wealthy man. Mm-hmm. But he would get great big bands with great artists out of Boston and stuff like that. So that he would use some guys that are real good players from this area, but they had jobs, like you said, construction, the fish houses and stuff like that. And they didn't want to leave their families to go on the road. And they were good enough, because the guys that made it, they were the only good players in New Bedford or in this area. There were a lot of good players, but they didn't want that as a career. Right. So Paul and Joe, they did. They went to Boston. They moved to Boston. From Boston, they went to New York. And Paul went with Duke Ellington for many years.
So we've got tentacles, or if you're like get a map with pins and string. We've got connections to Boston. We've got connections to
Providence,
New York.
Rhode Island.
Providence was a very big jazz. Because they had the whole Italian jazz musicians. I mean,
right. And then you had a big Cape Verdian population.
Right. Newport too, right?
Yes, Newport. Eddie Stack was one of our most popular groups. He's a guy who could have played in it. But he stayed here. He had a day job. And he came from Newport. Then he moved to New Bedford, Eddie Stack. And then the Newport Naval Base, we'd get a lot of musicians come down on the jam sessions were in the Navy. Yeah. So we'd have these jam sessions here, like I said, on Sundays, Saturdays, and you get these fine musicians that were in the Navy come down and play on Sundays.
Yeah, I mean, I was told by some old Navy guys that were stationed there that New Bedford was considered one heck of a liberty town. And it wasn't that far. I don't know if the train came up here by at that point or whatever, or bus. Or whatever.
Bus, yeah. But they'd be here on the weekends. And maybe some real good musicians. Some of them went on to be famous.
Now, what about Detroit? Because that's a big jazz town. There's still.
Detroit was a big jazz town. Yeah.
Are there connections between? Because there is Billy Strayhorn, who I told you during a Zoom with an art group that I'm connected with in Detroit. We were talking about this, that, and the other, and then jazz came up, and I talked about Paul Gonsalves, the little I know of him, and the Duke Ellington Orchestra, and the Newport Jazz Festival. And this one young woman said, "Well, do you know who my uncle was?" And I was thinking to myself, I don't even know who you are. It's like, you never introduced yourself. She says, I'm Billy Strayhorn's niece, and he did all the charts for Duke Ellington.
Yeah, he wrote most of it. Duke would be on the road all the time. Yeah, and take the A train, Billy Strayhorn. And there was a story when when Billy Strayhorn was in high school, he was writing music for plays and stuff like that in the area, in his hometown. And Lena Horn and he were real good friends. And Duke was playing in the club there, and the club owner told Duke, "I want you to hear this kid play piano," while Duke was on intermission, and he heard him play. And he told him, when you graduate school, when you ever come to New York, I want you to work for me. He says, you just get in New York, you take the A train. So Billy, on his way down, he wrote, "Take the A train." He wrote the song because Duke told him, "Take the A train."
Yeah.
So he lived with Duke's sister for years in New York, and he would write. And Duke would be on the road, and he'd think of something, and he'd call Billy and tell him part of it, and Billy would write a lot of stuff that Duke got credit for writing. Billy really wrote.
Billy really wrote. One final question, because it keeps bouncing in on my head, and whenever I go remember, I forget, and then when I forget, I remember.
Yeah, I do the same thing.
Otis Sutton and the Night Train. I used to listen to him when I was WCOD. Yeah. When I was in undergraduate school at SMU. Yeah. That to me, I don't even know what the man looked like, but that to me was the epitome of a jazz man. Yes. Because there was something about jazz that reeked of sophistication.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Otis was a guy I used to love to listen to him. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So I did remember it correctly.
Yeah, he was down at Cape or Martha's Vineyard. I think it was Martha's Vineyard.
I don't know where he was recording from, but COD was in Hyannis.
Yeah. But there was a while that he was at Martha's Vineyard, because I called him and talked to him on the phone. I never met him, but personally. But
it's possible. And he took the ferry, back and forth, because that's well, that was a summer town, but during the winter it was a whole nother place. Definitely. This was before the almost 24/7 Cape Cod kind of a thing. Yeah. Well, Dave Reis, thank you so very much.
Thank you.
I'm really looking forward to this. Well, folks, this ends this podcast. It's a celebratory introductory podcast, and stay safe out there. Be nice to each other, and keep tuned for Dave and his series. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
We'll see you next week for another episode of the South Coast Artist Index podcast. To learn more about the South Coast Artist Index, visit theartistindex.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.